Do you recognize how much you actually struggle against life in an unnecessary way? How much you force and move against life rather than learning to move with it? Do you notice how exhausting this actually is? Do you notice how much of your own energy gets burned and wasted just fighting against life? This video is going to be giving you some pretty practical ideas for recognizing a lot of this unnecessary struggle and then beginning to eliminate it. So we got to get into why we tend to force. Why do we always fight against life rather than learning to move with life? We have that fear of uncertainty. We have this desire to always be in control, and we have this attachment to outcomes. All of this is very useful for survival. If we're able to control reality, if we're able to just be certain about what's going to happen, if we're able to impose ourselves upon reality so that we get a certain outcome that's desirable for our survival, that helps us to survive, of course. And in a lot of contexts in our life, these instincts, these patterns that are ingrained in us, do the opposite of helping us to survive. They're actually harming us. What was once useful to our ancestors a long time ago is simply not becoming useful to a lot of contexts in the modern world. It's not very useful for a lot of people nowadays. Of course, they still have their place depending on the context, but in a lot of situations, they're actually very useless. And it's like this conditioning that just doesn't stop. It keeps going. Even though that we can conceptually realize that this is causing me suffering, this is exhausting, we still just get stuck in the pattern because we don't know any other way to be. We're still just in survival mode. We're still in fight or flight. Our nervous system is still unregulated, and we don't really have a direction to go towards that's going to move us out of this problem that we're in. We don't have that vision for our life that we need, and we don't know how to get there. We don't know how to craft the vision. We don't really know what has to be done. And so we just remain stuck. And then we go back asleep. We get trapped in distractions and junk food, in our phone and work and chasing relationships. We get stuck by all the modern distractions once again in order to escape this unnecessary suffering. And inevitably we find ourselves right back at the starting point, which was a place of unnecessary suffering once again. We find ourselves right back where we started. Maybe we get some things that we want, and then we realize that, wait a second, this didn't, make me happy forever. This wasn't the ultimate fulfillment, the relationship, the promotion at work, the $1 million, this or that new gadget, anything. We realize that none of this actually really completed us. None of this gave us that sense of like, okay, I'm done. But instead, when we actually get a lot of these things, we fear about losing them. We want to maintain them. We want to keep holding on to them. The fear of losing them is just another form of suffering now. And then we have to put in even more energy into maintaining all this stuff. And if we don't learn how to organize our life in a way to hold a relationship or a career or any of this kind of stuff, we're inevitably going to lose it. And regardless of what happens, we're just still stuck in the same conditioning of fear, not being able to embrace uncertainty, forcing outcomes. So our psychological conditioning remains the same regardless of the experience that we find ourselves in. It's just that now our problems are manifesting in a new way. So the cost of forcing is pretty great. You are emotionally exhausted. You are blind to life. You're actually blind to the beauty of the experience that you're having because you're so stuck in survival mode. You're blind to how fantastic it actually is to be experiencing this moment right now. Can you actually see the magic of this experience that you're having right now? Can you look at an ordinary object and experience a sense of awe simply looking at it? Recognizing the profundity of existence itself, regardless of what that thing is. And can you see how you always taking experience for granted makes you kind of numb to that beauty? Just like how if I performed a miracle 100 times, at the 100th time you would stop caring. But at the first time you would do a triple take. You'd be like, what did he just do? But then as it's repeated, it becomes less profound to you. You start taking it for granted. So you actually start to miss deep growth opportunities as well when you're always forcing things. Very deep, genuine forms of growth. You completely miss out on them because you're just stuck again in all these old patterns. You can't break out of them, and they're controlling you. You think that you're the driver, but actually this conditioning is what's controlling you. It's this sort of subtle illusion. So here we get into the actual power of allowing. You actually learn to trust in life. You start to move with life rather than against it, essentially flow over resistance. And you actually start to experience lasting inner peace. So let's go through this one by one. You start trusting in life automatically. This becomes the norm. Simply because you realize how pointless it is to always be fighting against life, the exhaustion of that finally snaps, finally clicks in, and you decide to just finally begin letting go. The suffering that came with that experience is finally seen as simply not worth it. It was never worth it. It was an illusion that it was worth it. And then you just have no choice but to let go. Essentially, you become mature enough, you become wise enough to actually just detect that my constant fighting against life was actually my own lack of development. It was my own lack of consciousness. It was my own lack of maturity. Then you start to move with life. You flow with life rather than resisting or fighting it. So life becomes easier and more fulfilling when we stop fighting and let it fold unnaturally. You start to detect a fluidity to experience. Your actual perception of experience begins to change. It stops feeling so solid and rigid and mechanical. It starts to feel fluid, like water. You actually start to detect the alignment of life, and you can move with life, move with the forces of nature, rather than always trying to move against them. You start to actually trust this moment. You see how all this stuff kind of connects? And from this, you find inner peace. So your surrender brings a sense of ease and lightness, freeing us from the burden of always trying to control everything, always trying to manipulate everything, always trying to force everything. And this inner peace is a more mature form of peace. Because this inner peace isn't reliant upon getting what I want and then always having to feel a particular way, always having to feel this way and not that way, but it's more so regardless of what the flow of life brings to me and where it takes me, I'm going to learn how do I remain open to it. I'm going to learn how do I actually simply trust it and remain open to it rather than closing down and then resisting it. The worldview changes from always trying to get what I want exclusively for survival purposes to learning to trust life. And counterintuitively, a lot of the things you want to actually start to enter your life. You actually become more creative, sharp, more empathetic, more caring, more grounded, more stable. You can relate to people better. You're a better listener. You're more confident. You're more authentic. A lot of the things that you really want start to actually enter your life. Opportunities start to become clearer to you. You can hear that inner voice and learn to follow it. You're better in your relationships as well. You can make changes in your life faster when they're necessary. You're more adaptable. You're more flexible rather than being rigid and stuck. So how do you start allowing? You actually have to start becoming aware of your resistance. It's like you're making that unconscious suffering conscious. So recognize all the moments when you're forcing something and learn to reflect on it. Learn to bring awareness to this. The best way to actually start doing this is through mindfulness meditation, and then really learning that, really being skilled at that. being able to detect all the ways in which you resist life, being honest about it, and then learning to ease up in those experiences. And it's very counterintuitive. It's like the opposite of what your conditioning is doing, which is why it's so difficult, which is why it takes time, which is why it's a process. It's a growth that's actually going to happen. So there's a shift to acceptance, learning to accept the present moment fully, even if it's uncomfortable or uncertain, leads to this sort of greater sense of peace. Being able to embrace the present, regardless of what it is, allows you to feel at home within the experience that you're having. Because what's happening is already happening. Why fight against it? What's the point? There is no point. It's a futile effort. It's a waste of energy. You also have to start letting go of the how. So focus on your intention and let life handle the details. This doesn't mean that you're incompetent and you don't learn anything, or you're completely passive and you don't have to build anything on your own, but that for every little thing you're able to just shift your relationship to it. And this is subtle, right? I want you to actually notice that there's a lot of things in your life that you are always trying to just control and manipulate due to fear. And then when you actually start to realize that, yeah, this is not worth it, like regardless of of anything, first of all, this is just making me suffer. The whole point of this is that I want something to make me feel happy, but it's actually, this whole process is just making me suffer. So why would I continue doing this? So you're letting go of the how, right? This doesn't mean that you can't contemplate how to change anything in your life ever again, but this means that for every little thing, right, for a lot of the things that are occurring in your life, you're not fixated upon a lot of the unnecessary things. You can actually just trust what's going to happen. And counterintuitively, this saves you a lot of energy. It also allows you to adapt to life. So the how starts to form itself in real time. And that freed up energy and presence that you have allows the how to form in a more efficient way. And a really big part of this is embracing uncertainty. This is something that the human mind doesn't want to do. It wants to have everything figured out and known and put into a concept and boxed in. But a core part of letting go of the how is embracing uncertainty. So practicing seeing the unknown as a space of possibility and not a threat. Learning to be curious in the face of the unknown rather than threatening. Learning to see it as an opportunity to pick up a new skill, to learn something new. Treating it like this rather than always relating out of fear. So some core truths about learning to allow is that surrender is not a weakness. It's a profound strength. That learning to let go is a very powerful position to be in. It's probably the most powerful position you can actually find yourself in. And that this alignment actually brings clarity. So this state of always fighting against life is not a state of clarity. And this is the state that most of humanity finds themselves in. And it's a foggy state. It's reactive. It's not a state of deep clarity. There's a big shift between these two ways of being. So here's some signs that you're forcing. Forcing creates frustration, repeated obstacles, feeling drained, and overthinking every step. Allowing is a sense of ease, synchronicity, unexpected blessings, and inspired action. So your actions come from intrinsic motivation. They're genuinely motivated by your own psychological, emotional system. Things like curiosity or creativity, or a deep sense of purpose, a deep sense of mastery, a deep emotional connection to what you're doing. So here's some practical steps for cultivating allowing. Actually, just have the intention to do it. A very sincere intention. This is like rock bottom. Without this very genuine intention, it's just not going to happen. Moving up from there, things like journaling and meditation, this is very essential. Actually, just journal. Where do I feel stuck? Where do I always fight against life? What do I struggle against? What can I not accept? Start actually just asking yourself these kinds of questions and just bring them to the forefront of your awareness. Ask yourself powerful questions, like probe into life. A lot of people go through their whole life, they don't ask a lot of powerful questions. And then no deep changes can actually start to occur. Moving on from that is actually just having structured time for meditation, having a way to just observe what's happening rather than always being identified with what's happening. Learning to observe the resistance and observe thoughts and emotions rather than always being stuck in them. This gives you some space to create new things rather than always being reactive towards them. I recently got a comment saying that you don't have to meditate, you can just go for a walk instead. This is an interesting comment because they're very different. Having an actual meditation practice and going for a walk, these are very different things. I go for walks and I've been meditating every day for 7 years. Very different things. Not close whatsoever. Only when you're advanced can you begin to let go of that boundary between walking and meditation. It's an advanced place to be. But when you're a beginner, you got to learn the basics. You got to learn the formal practice. It's like, again, if you're weightlifting, what are you going to do? If you're weightlifting, you have to learn, how do I bench press? How do I use these dumbbells? How do I do a squat? What's the form? And then once you learn the basics, you can start experimenting with more advanced things. But if you don't have those basics down, what foundation do you have to build upon? So life isn't about constant struggle. It's about partnering with the flow of existence itself, that intelligent rhythm to life, moving with it rather than against it. And the more that you do that, the more fulfilled you actually become in life. The more inner peace you find, the more clarity. And this is going to require a vision for your life. This is going to require time and intentional development. Don't expect this to happen on its own. Don't expect this to happen in a month. Don't expect this to even happen in 1 year. You need that vision for who you want to be in your life. You want to have that vision for what you want your consciousness to look like. You need that vision for discovering what's true about your experience and then learning to use truth to grow. That's it for this video. If you're interested in working one-to-one with me, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.